The Council on Foreign Relations, A Secret History of Global Influence. Hello and welcome back to Driftwood Histories. Tonight, our journey takes us into the heart of the American establishment. We are not exploring a secret society with ancient rituals or mystical symbols. We are stepping into a quiet, elegant mansion on Park Avenue in New York City, the home of what is arguably the most influential private organization in modern American history. They do not rule from the shadows, but their influence is often felt in the shadows. Their membership list is a roll call of American power. Presidents and secretaries of state, Wall Street titans and media moguls, CIA directors and five-star generals. They publish a famous journal, they host private meetings, and for a century, they have quietly, patiently, and profoundly shaped the course of American foreign policy. They are the Council on Foreign Relations, or the CFR. To its members, it is simply a nonpartisan think tank, a vital forum for discussing the great challenges facing the United States and the world. But to its critics, it is the public face of the American deep state, the very nucleus of the Eastern establishment, a secret government in waiting, dedicated to promoting a globalist agenda. So, find your comfortable place. Let the noise of our world recede. Close your eyes, and allow my voice to be your guide as we explore the quiet and often unseen history of the Council on Foreign Relations and the immense influence it has wielded over the American century. Our story begins not with a conspiracy, but in the chaos and disillusionment that followed the war to end all wars. To understand the origins of the Council on Foreign Relations, we must journey back to the year 1917. The United States had just entered the Great War, the war to end all wars. A conflict that was consuming a generation of young men and shattering the old order of European empires. In Washington, President Woodrow Wilson, a former academic and a man of profound, and some would say naive idealism, was already looking beyond the battlefield. He envisioned a new world, a world where this kind of catastrophic conflict could never happen again. His vision was for a new international order, one based not on the old cynical balance of power politics, but on principles of self-determination for all nations, on open diplomacy, on free trade, and, most importantly, on a new international body that could mediate disputes and prevent future wars. This vision would later be codified in his famous 14 points. But Wilson, the former president of Princeton University, was also a pragmatist. He knew that to shape this new world, he needed more than just a vision. He needed a plan, a detailed, comprehensive, and expertly crafted plan. And to create it, he needed the best minds in America. And so, in September of 1917, he commissioned a secret working group, a group whose existence was, for a time, known only to a handful of people at the highest levels of government. This group was called, simply, the Inquiry. The Inquiry was, in essence, America's first true think tank. It was a group of approximately 150 of the nation's most prominent academics, historians, geographers, economists, and political scientists, all recruited from the elite universities of the East Coast, particularly Harvard, Yale, and Columbia. Their mission was to conduct a detailed, comprehensive, and confidential study of the world's political, economic, and geographical landscape. They were tasked with preparing the American delegation for the complex and high-stakes negotiations that would inevitably follow the end of the war. The group was led by Wilson's close friend and most trusted advisor, Colonel Edward M. House. Colonel House was a powerful and enigmatic figure, a Texas political operator who held no official government title but was, for a time, the second most powerful man in Washington. He was Wilson's eminence grise, the quiet, invisible hand that guided much of his policy. Under House's direction, the members of the Inquiry worked in secret, in the quiet, map-filled halls of the American Geographical Society in New York City. They divided the world into regions and assigned teams of experts to each. They drew new maps of a Europe that had not yet been born, redrawing the borders of the collapsing Austro-Hungarian and Ottoman empires along ethnic and linguistic lines. They wrote thousands of pages of reports on every conceivable topic, from the history of Polish nationalism to the economic resources of the Balkans, to the future of the German colonies in Africa. They were, in a very real sense, designing the blueprint for the post-war world. The members of the Inquiry were a formidable collection of intellectual power. They included figures like the great historian James T. Shotwell of Columbia University, the geographer Isaiah Bowman, who was the director of the American Geographical Society, and a young, brilliant journalist and political philosopher named Walter Lippmann. In 1919, after the armistice was signed, many of the key members of the Inquiry traveled with President Wilson to the Paris Peace Conference. They were the technical experts, the intellectual architects, who advised the American delegation during the complex and often bitter negotiations at the Palace of Versailles. It was here, in Paris, amidst the grandeur, the hope, and the intense political horse-trading of the conference, that the idea for the Council on Foreign Relations was truly born. A group of high-level British and American delegates, many of whom were members of the Inquiry or their British counterparts, began to hold a series of private, informal meetings at the Hotel Majestic on the Avenue Kleber. This group, which included Colonel House, Walter Lippmann, and the British historian Arnold Toynbee, shared a common sense of disappointment and anxiety. They saw that the idealistic vision of President Wilson was being compromised by the old, cynical, and nationalistic interests of the European powers. They saw that the peace they were crafting was a fragile one, and they feared that it would not last. They came to a shared conclusion. For a new, more peaceful world order to succeed, for the newly formed League of Nations to have any chance of preventing future wars, there needed to be a permanent, private, and non-governmental organization of influential citizens in both Britain and the United States. This organization would be dedicated to the continuous, serious, and non-partisan study of international affairs. Its purpose would be to educate the public, to inform policymakers, and, most importantly, to foster a common, Anglo-American understanding of the world and a shared commitment to an internationalist foreign policy. From these meetings at the Hotel Majestic, two sister organizations were conceived. In Britain, it led to the founding of the Royal Institute of International Affairs, which would later become world-renowned as Chatham House. And in the United States, after the American delegation returned home, it led to the creation of the Council on Foreign Relations, or the CFR. The CFR was officially founded in New York City on July 29, 1921. It was a merger of the original group of academics and experts from the Inquiry and a group of prominent and powerful New York bankers and international lawyers. This fusion of intellectual power and financial power would become the defining characteristic of the organization. Its founding chairman was the influential Wall Street lawyer, John W. Davis, who had served as ambassador to the UK and would later be the Democratic nominee for president in 1924. Its first president was Elihu Root, a former Secretary of State, Secretary of War, and a Nobel Peace Prize laureate. The early funding for the council came from the great philanthropic foundations, particularly the Carnegie Corporation and, most significantly, the Rockefeller Foundation. The stated mission of the CFR was, and remains to this day, nonpartisan and educational. It seeks to promote understanding of foreign policy and America's role in the world. It does this through its publications, its study groups, and its private, off-the-record meetings. But its true and profound influence comes from its membership. The CFR is not a mass organization. It is an exclusive, invitation-only club. Its members are drawn from the highest echelons of the American establishment. The list of its past and present members is a staggering roll call of American power. It has included nearly every significant figure in the world of American foreign policy for the past century. At least 12 U.S. presidents have been members, from Herbert Hoover to Joe Biden. Nearly every Secretary of State since its founding, from Henry Stimson to Cordell Hull, from Dean Acheson to John Foster Dulles, from Henry Kissinger to Madeleine Albright and Hillary Clinton, has been a member. The same is true for the Secretaries of Defense and the Secretaries of the Treasury. The leadership of the American intelligence community has been deeply intertwined with the Council. Allen Dulles, one of the founding fathers of the CIA and its longest-serving director, was the president of the CFR in the late 1940s. Nearly every subsequent director of the Central Intelligence Agency has also been a member. The Council's membership is also a who's who of American finance and industry. The heads of Goldman Sachs, J.P. Morgan Chase, and other Wall Street giants are members. The CEOs of the largest multinational corporations are members. And, crucially, the proprietors, publishers, and leading journalists of the most influential media organizations, the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, and the major television networks are also deeply integrated into the Council. This incredible concentration of political, financial, and media power in a single, private, and largely unaccountable organization is what has made the Council on Foreign Relations the central focus of so many conspiracy theories about a hidden American deep state or establishment. The Council operates from its elegant headquarters, the Harold Pratt House, a magnificent mansion on the corner of Park Avenue and 68th Street in New York City. Here, in quiet, wood-paneled rooms, away from the glare of cameras and the scrutiny of the public, the most powerful people in America gather for private, off-the-record meetings. They listen to speeches from visiting world leaders, they participate in study groups that produce influential policy reports, and they forge the personal relationships and the intellectual consensus that will come to shape the course of American foreign policy. The Council's influence was profoundly solidified during the Second World War. As the war began in Europe, long before the United States entered the conflict, the CFR, with a new round of major funding from the Rockefeller Foundation, established the War and Peace Studies Project. This was, in essence, a private shadow state department. For the next 5 years, its various study groups, composed of the nation's top experts, met in secret. They produced nearly 700 policy papers and memoranda that were passed directly to the Real Estate Department and to President Franklin D. Roosevelt. The members of the CFR effectively planned the entire blueprint for the post-war world. They designed the institutional architecture of the new international order. They were the primary architects of the United Nations. The UN Charter itself was largely drafted by a CFR study group, and they were instrumental in the creation of the great post-war financial institutions, the International Monetary Fund (IMF) and the World Bank. In the post-war era, as the Cold War began, the CFR became the intellectual heart of America's grand strategy. Its most influential publication, the prestigious journal Foreign Affairs, became the vehicle for some of the most important and consequential policy ideas of the 20th century. In July of 1947, a now famous anonymous article entitled "The Sources of Soviet Conduct," signed only by X, was published in the journal. The article argued that the Soviet Union was an inherently expansionist power, and that the main element of any United States policy toward it must be a long-term, patient but firm and vigilant containment of Russian expansive tendencies. It was later revealed that X was George F. Kennan, a high-ranking State Department official and a CFR member. In this single article, Kennan laid out the famous doctrine of containment, the strategy that would guide American foreign policy for the next 40 years, through the Korean War, the Cuban Missile Crisis, and the Vietnam War. The Council on Foreign Relations had become more than just a think tank. It had become the central, private institution where the American foreign policy consensus was forged. A quiet, intellectual, and immensely powerful consensus, born from the ashes of one world war, and destined to shape the course of the next. For its defenders, and for its many powerful members, the Council on Foreign Relations is a national treasure. It is a place where the best and brightest minds from different political parties, from academia, from business, and from the military can come together to have serious, informed, and nonpartisan discussions about the great and complex challenges facing the nation in a dangerous world. It is, they argue, a vital and irreplaceable resource that has helped to provide stability, continuity, and intellectual rigor to American foreign policy through decades of profound global change. But for its critics, the Council on Foreign Relations is something far more sinister. It is the public face, the intellectual heart, and the primary gatekeeper of the American deep state, or the establishment. It is, they claim, a private, self-perpetuating oligarchy that has, for a century, effectively hijacked American foreign policy, steering the nation towards a consistent globalist agenda that serves the interests of its own elite internationalist members, rather than the interests of the American people. This criticism, which has been a persistent undercurrent in American political life for generations, comes from both the political left and the right. From the left, critics like the intellectual and activist Noam Chomsky have long argued that the CFR is a key instrument of American corporate and imperial power. They see it as a place where the leaders of multinational corporations and the architects of American foreign policy collude to create a world that is safe, not for democracy, but for American economic and military domination. They point out that the Council's funding has historically come from the great corporate foundations like the Rockefeller, Ford, and Carnegie Foundations, and that its membership is dominated by Wall Street bankers and corporate executives. The Council's goal, in this view, is not world peace, but the creation and maintenance of a global system that benefits the American corporate elite. But the most fervent, the most widespread, and the most enduring criticism has come from the political right. For decades, conservative and populist critics have seen the CFR as the very heart of the liberal Eastern establishment. They accuse it of promoting a one-world government agenda, of seeking to undermine American sovereignty, and of consistently sacrificing American national interests to the authority of international institutions like the United Nations, an institution that the CFR itself helped to create. One of the most influential of these early critics was W. Cleon Skousen, a former FBI agent and conservative author whose 1970 book, The Naked Capitalist, painted the CFR as a key part of a global conspiracy of elite international bankers who were secretly working to bring about a socialist world government. Another was Dan Smoot, also a former FBI agent, who produced a popular newsletter in the 1960s, the Dan Smoot Report, which repeatedly described the CFR as an invisible government that controlled both the Democratic and Republican parties. These critics, and their modern-day successors in the world of online conspiracy theories, point to the phenomenon of the revolving door as definitive proof of the Council's undue influence. A person will serve as a senior partner at a Wall Street bank like Goldman Sachs, whose leaders are almost always CFR members. They will then be appointed by a new president to serve as the Secretary of the Treasury. After their time in government, they will leave and take up a position as the head of a major foundation, a university, or will return to the private sector, their influence and their connections greatly enhanced. The Council on Foreign Relations is the club, the central network, that connects all of these different worlds of power. This creates, the critics argue, a permanent, unelected governing class. A group whose members all share the same background, often an Ivy League education, the same internationalist worldview, and the same vested interests in maintaining the global financial and political status quo. The Council's influence is exercised in several key, and often very private, ways. First, through its meetings. The CFR hosts hundreds of private, off-the-record meetings each year at its elegant headquarters, the Harold Pratt House in New York, and at its office in Washington, D.C. At these meetings, which are not open to the public or the press, members can have candid, unfiltered conversations with sitting heads of state, foreign ministers, central bankers, and other global leaders. This gives them a level of access to information and a depth of understanding that is simply unavailable to the ordinary citizen or even to most elected officials. Second, through its study groups and task forces. The Council convenes small, influential groups, composed of its expert members, to analyze specific foreign policy challenges from the future of NATO, to the rise of China, to the challenges of cybersecurity. These groups produce reports and policy recommendations that are often highly influential in shaping the debate in Washington and setting the agenda for the State Department and the Pentagon. And third, and perhaps most importantly, through its personnel. The CFR acts as a kind of informal, but incredibly effective recruitment agency for the federal government. When a new presidential administration comes into office, regardless of whether it is Republican or Democrat, it will inevitably draw many of its top foreign policy, economic, and intelligence officials directly from the membership roles of the Council on Foreign Relations. This has been true for every administration since World War II. It ensures a remarkable degree of continuity in American foreign policy, a bipartisan consensus, regardless of the outcome of elections. For critics, this is profoundly undemocratic. They argue that the CFR effectively sets the boundaries of acceptable political debate in the realm of foreign policy. It determines what is, and what is not, a serious or responsible foreign policy option. For example, for decades, the CFR consensus has been overwhelmingly in favor of free trade, international alliances like NATO, and an active interventionist American role in the world. Politicians who have challenged this consensus, who have advocated for a more America-first, non-interventionist or protectionist foreign policy, have often been marginalized and labeled as isolationists or irresponsible by the very media and academic establishment that is so deeply intertwined with the Council. The CFR, in this view, is not a secret society in the traditional sense, with secret rituals or mystical oaths. It is something far more modern and far more effective. It is the institutional brain of the American establishment, a quiet and powerful gatekeeper that ensures that the right people with the right ideas are always in the right rooms where the real decisions are made. It is the place where the consensus of the powerful is forged. This perception was perhaps best articulated by one of the Council's own members. In 1991, David Rockefeller, in his role as chairman of the CFR, gave a speech to a meeting of another of his elite groups, the Bilderberg Group. In a private speech that was later leaked, he said, "We are grateful to the Washington Post, the New York Times, Time magazine, and other great publications whose directors have attended our meetings and respected their promises of discretion for almost 40 years. It would have been impossible for us to develop our plan for the world if we had been subjected to the lights of publicity during those years. But the world is now more sophisticated and prepared to march towards a world government. The supranational sovereignty of an intellectual elite and world bankers is surely preferable to the national autodetermination practiced in past centuries." While the authenticity of this exact quote is debated, it perfectly captures the worldview that critics accuse the Council of holding. A belief that a small, intellectual, and financial elite is better equipped to manage the world than the messy, unpredictable, and often irrational processes of national democracy. The Council on Foreign Relations, then, is a profound paradox. It is a private organization that has had a more profound impact on public policy than almost any other. It is a non-governmental body that has often acted as a shadow government. And it is an institution dedicated to the study of the world that has, in the process, quietly, patiently, and powerfully remade the world in its own image. In the 21st century, the world that the Council on Foreign Relations was founded to manage, and in many ways to lead, has become far more complex, more unpredictable, and more fractured than its founders could have ever imagined. The old, post-Cold War unipolar moment, in which the United States stood as the world's sole superpower, has passed. The internationalist, liberal, free trade consensus that the CFR championed for a century has been shattered. We now live in a new, multipolar world. The most dramatic shift, of course, has been the meteoric rise of China as a strategic and economic rival to the United States. The resurgence of an aggressive, nationalist Russia has challenged the security architecture of Europe. And perhaps most surprisingly, the rise of populist and nationalist movements within the Western world itself, in both the United States and Europe, has mounted a direct and powerful challenge to the very globalist project that the CFR helped to build. The Council has had to adapt to this new and challenging landscape. Its membership, once almost exclusively the domain of white, male, East Coast establishment figures, has become more diverse, including more women, more people of color, and more voices from outside the traditional corridors of power in Washington and New York. Its study groups and its journal, Foreign Affairs, now grapple with a new set of complex, 21st-century challenges. They publish reports on the dangers of cybersecurity and information warfare, on the profound societal and economic disruptions being caused by artificial intelligence, on the existential threat of climate change, and on the new great power competition with China. But the Council's core mission to guide American foreign policy and to promote a stable, American-led international system remains the same. And so, too, does the profound suspicion and criticism that has followed it for 100 years. In the age of the internet and social media, the old conspiracy theories about the CFR have found a vast and fertile new ground in which to grow. The Council is now a central figure in the modern deep state narrative. For a new generation of online critics, it is seen as a key part of a globalist cabal that is working against the interests of ordinary people. This was perhaps most vividly demonstrated during the presidency of Donald Trump. Trump's America First platform was a direct and explicit repudiation of the internationalist consensus that the CFR had championed for decades. He was deeply critical of international alliances like NATO, of free trade agreements like NAFTA, and of international institutions like the United Nations. His rhetoric often targeted a cabal of globalists, who, he claimed, had enriched themselves while betraying the American worker. And yet, in a profound demonstration of the enduring power of the establishment, even President Trump found it impossible to govern without relying on the very people who were members of the institutions he so publicly scorned. His first Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, was a CFR member. His first Secretary of Defense, James Mattis, was a CFR member. His National Security Advisor, H.R. McMaster, was a CFR member. Even in a populist, nationalist administration, the personnel and the expertise of the Council on Foreign Relations proved to be indispensable. This highlights the true nature of the CFR's enduring influence. It is not the influence of a secret, sinister plot. It is the influence of an institution. It is the influence of a network that holds a near monopoly on what is considered serious and credible foreign policy expertise in the United States. Its power is the power of a deeply entrenched consensus. So what, then, is the true legacy of the Council on Foreign Relations as it moves through its second century of influence? It is undeniable that the CFR has been the single most influential private organization in the history of American foreign policy. It provided the intellectual architecture for the post-World War II international order, an order that, for all its flaws, prevented a Third World War and presided over an unprecedented era of global prosperity. It formulated the strategy of containment that guided the United States through the long, dangerous twilight struggle of the Cold War. And its members have been at the very center of nearly every major American foreign policy decision for the past 100 years. The story of the CFR is, in many ways, the story of the American establishment in the 20th and 21st centuries. It is a story of a group of men, and now women, who believed deeply in the ideal of public service, and who also believed, with equal sincerity, that they, the educated, the experienced, and the well-connected elite, were the ones best suited to guide the nation's destiny on the world stage. They are not a sinister, all-powerful conspiracy in the way that their most extreme critics imagine. They are often divided among themselves, and their influence has waxed and waned over the decades. But they are a powerful and, from a democratic perspective, a profoundly undemocratic force in American life. They represent a concentration of influence that operates largely outside of public view and beyond the reach of the electoral process. The Council on Foreign Relations is a quiet, dignified, and immensely powerful institution. It is the invisible hand that has, for a century, helped to shape the consensus of the powerful. It is a testament to the idea that the most important history is not always the history that is made in the glare of the public spotlight, with its soundbites and its political theater, but the history that is made in the quiet, wood-paneled rooms where the elite gather to discuss, to debate, and ultimately to decide the fate of the world. And so our journey into the quiet, influential world of the Council on Foreign Relations comes to its conclusion. We have explored its origins in the idealistic and ultimately tragic aftermath of World War I. We have examined its immense and undeniable influence on a century of American foreign policy. And we have navigated the persistent controversies and conspiracy theories that surround this powerful and private institution. We began our story with the inquiry, learning how a secret group of 150 academics, tasked by President Woodrow Wilson with planning for the peace after the Great War, laid the intellectual groundwork for a new kind of organization. We saw how their meetings at the Hotel Majestic in Paris in 1919, alongside their British counterparts, led to the creation of two sister institutions, Chatham House in London and, in 1921, the Council on Foreign Relations in New York. Then, our journey took us into its role as the establishment's gatekeepers. We saw how the CFR, through its exclusive invitation-only membership, became the central nervous system of the American foreign policy establishment. We explored its crucial role during World War II, where its war and peace studies project effectively acted as a shadow State Department, drafting the blueprint for the post-war world, including the United Nations and the International Monetary Fund. We saw how its influential journal, Foreign Affairs, published George F. Kennan's X article, which laid out the doctrine of containment that would guide America through the Cold War. And finally, we examined the enduring influence of the CFR in our own changing world. We looked at the persistent conspiracy theories that label it as the public face of the deep state. And we saw how it has adapted to a new multipolar world, grappling with the rise of China and the populist backlash against the very globalist order it helped to create. The Council on Foreign Relations is not a secret society with ancient oaths and mystical rituals. It is something far more modern and far more real. It is the institutional heart of the American foreign policy establishment. Its power lies not in secret plots or hidden commands, but in the quiet, persistent, and powerful shaping of an elite consensus. It is a story that reminds us that influence is often most effective when it is least visible, and that the history we see on the public stage is often only half the story. Thank you for joining me on this voyage with Driftwood Histories. If these stories have stirred your curiosity and soothed your mind, I invite you to subscribe and join our community of fellow travelers. There are many more hidden currents of time, many more secret histories, for us to explore together. Until then, sleep well. May you always seek to understand the world around you, both the seen and the unseen, and may your dreams be peaceful. Good night.